Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are in our 26th year, I interview poets and other brands of writers about their craft, what they're working on today, what they've accomplished in the past, what they might be planning for the future. We also occasionally have other kinds of artists on. We have had on sculptors, we've had on actors, we've had on painters. It's a pretty wide net. So if you have an idea for someone who might be right for the Writer's Block, whether a writer or another kind of artist, watch for our address at the end of the program. We'd be very happy to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block is an original show produced here at Cape Ann TV, like many other original shows generated right here on Cape Ann. That's a product of the cable access television, a cable process. You don't get this community service with Dish, so don't be sucked in by those Dish commercials that you see on other television networks when you're not watching the Writer's Block. Tonight, I'm very happy to say we do have a poet, a lady who's been writing for many years, a friend of mine for many years, and whose work I have admired for all those years. Her name is Claire Keyes, and we're going to be talking about her new book, What Diamonds Can Do. I'm going to use the book and a paragraph of intro in the book to introduce Claire to you this evening. She is the author of two previous collections, The Question of Rapture and the chapbook Rising and Falling. Her poems and reviews have appeared most recently in Literary Bohemian, Sugar Mule, Oberon, Crab Orchard Review, and Blackbird. In addition, she is the author of The Aesthetics of Power, the poetry of Adrienne Rich, the great American poet who died 15 years ago.
No, 1 or 2 years ago.
1 or 2 years ago,
Yeah.
I'm corrected. She has won the Robert Penn Warren Award from New England Writers, as well as a first prize in poetry from Smartish Pace. The recipient of a grant in poetry from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, she also received a poetry fellowship from the Wurlitzer Foundation, and she is now Professor Emerita at Salem State University. I have to be careful to say university these days. She teaches in the university's lifelong learning program and makes her home in Marblehead. Claire, welcome back to the Writer's Block.
Nice to see you again, John.
You were on in 2008?
2008, I think so,
with
yeah.
the previous book. I don't know why I thought Adrienne Rich had been gone for so long, but
Yeah.
Was she ill for a long time?
She had rheumatism from the time that she was a young woman. And I can remember going to readings by Adrienne Rich, and she would have a cane and she walking on stage, and she had many operations, and it was pretty tough all through her
I know she looked older
life.
than she should have in photographs.
Yeah,
many
yeah.
times. Well, I just got it wrong. What Diamonds Can Do is a wonderful title. I wonder if you could give us a little background on the inception of the book, when you conceived it and when it came out.
Well, as you know from putting your own books together, it's a really complicated process. I don't sit down and think, I'm going to write a book called What Diamonds Can Do. I sit down to write a poem. And then the next week I might write another poem. And then they start to accumulate. And then I think, I want to put a book together. But I have all these different poems from several different years. Well, since 2008, I had been writing all these poems, and I think, I got to do something with them. I want to do something, want to put them together. And then the process is getting a publisher and sending the manuscript out. And once the publisher accepts it, well, mine did for this publication. It was called Cherry Grove Editions. I spent all last summer trying to figure out the very best kind of structure for the book.
Last, you mean summer of 15?
Last summer, no, I'm
Summer-
sorry, summer of 14.
Summer of 14.
Because this book didn't come out until March 15. So I was working on it last summer, the summer of 14.
I want to hold the book up, which I haven't done yet, to make sure that we can let our viewers see what it looks like, what diamonds can do with a wonderful aerial shot of two geese.
Cormorants, actually.
Cormorants.
Yeah.
Corrected. Two cormorants. They look a lot like geese.
Well, the photographer told me they were cormorants,
Oh.
so that's why I feel like I can correct you.
We'll take the photographer's word.
Yes.
Where can viewers buy the book?
They can buy it on Amazon, for one, but there's also a wonderful bookstore on the North Shore that is in Beverly Farms. And I'm sure you know what the name of that bookstore is. Is it called The Bookstore?
I think it always was. I don't know.
The bookstore
Haven't been
at
in there in a
Beverly
while.
Farms, and they have been absolutely wonderful to me.
Good.
And I highly endorse them.
I think the title's wonderful. And I know, and I'd like you to explain to the audience what that refers to. And then could you read that title poem for us?
Sure. This is a poem which has a title that directly leads into the body of the poem. And so thank you for asking me to read it because it's the best way to explain it. But there's a background to this poem.
And what page?
It's on page 41.
Please, give us the background. That's
All right. I went to visit the Old Manse in Concord, Massachusetts. And this is a house where Hawthorne lived with his wife, Sophia Peabody Hawthorne. And he rented the house from Emerson. So this was in the first half of the 19th century. This is Hawthorne. And one morning, his wife, Sophia, had finished painting in her studio downstairs. And Hawthorne had gone out to visit Thoreau, and there had been a terrible snowstorm the past few days, but he could go out and he could walk. So he left her alone with their child, Una. And Sophia went upstairs. This is something that the guide told me, told the group of us there. And she had her diamond ring and wrote on the window with her diamond ring. And visitors to the Old Manse can see what she wrote. So she wrote about Una, her daughter, but she also wrote about what she was seeing outside in the snow. So
So diamonds, of course, can score glass easily.
yes, yes. What diamonds can do. Some write poetry on glass windows, like Sophia Hawthorne at the Old Manse with her wedding ring. Common enough in the 19th century, but it was like finding a note in a bottle picked up on the beach. I felt a kind of awe. Granted, Sophia was the wife of you-know-who and could commit what is, in essence, graffiti, with no repercussions. And granted, she must have been god-awful bored when he took off the morning after the snowstorm to visit Thoreau and left her alone with the baby. But still, scratching on the window of a rented house in the room where his imagination played with dark things. So like him to face his desk to the wall. She stood looking out the window, snowy fields, icy river. Was it really just being overwhelmed by the pretty view, the trees, all glass chandeliers, as she wrote? After coining the metaphor, she incised it with gusto. And like most mothers, she had to brag about her kid, Una, only 10 months old, and named for Spenser's Fairy Queen heroine. Did posterity really have to know she stood on the windowsill? So we record the minutiae of our lives, gambling that significance rests in our homely dramas. Thus, Sophia got down on her knees, diamond in hand, proud mother, yes, but incidental, not at all, a someone who signed her name with a flourish.
Thank you. It's very nice. There is in this poem a great sympathy for her.
Yes.
And you say Sophia, not Sophia.
Yes, I do. I
Is that the
might
way-
be wrong.
Did they pronounce it?
I think it's Sophia. Sophia?
So there's a great sympathy for her here. And it seems to me
Yeah.
almost simultaneous and parallel to a sort of humorous, almost playful attitude towards her predicament. Are they both here,
Exactly.
or am I reading this poem correctly?
Oh, yes, absolutely. But she was a very dutiful wife, and she admired Hawthorne greatly. So this isn't any kind of criticism of Hawthorne necessarily, but she was writing on the window of a rented house in the room where his imagination played with dark things. So like him, to face his desk to the wall. I'm teaching a course on Hawthorne right now, so he's very much a part of my thinking these days.
Is she a little bit pissed off at him right now for leaving her?
It's possible, so like him, to go out and see his interesting friend, Thoreau, and leave her alone with the baby.
Maybe
So-
he had to see if his friend was okay after the storm.
Could be, yes.
If it was a winter like
Winter-like day, yeah.
2014, 15.
I'm sure Thoreau was okay. He could handle himself. But anyway, that was fun to find a way of sort of making a memory out of that pretty interesting experience.
It's a small miracle that glass has survived 150 years.
Right. Well, it's one of the main reasons now why people go to that house,
To see that
is
glass.
to see that window. And so the tourists are interested.
Was in fact writing on glass with diamonds common?
Very common. If you remember reading Wuthering Heights ages
I remember
ago,
that I read it. I
You
don't
read it.
remember it.
there was also a writing on the window in Wuthering Heights, but it's something that people used to do in the late 18th, early 19th century.
Before television, huh?
Before television.
You have marked some other poems in the book that you were thinking of reading, and I'd like you to pick another
Okay.
and give us a little précis of the poem, and
Sure.
then read it for us.
Well, I'd like to
No,
read a
what
poem I
page?
call After Giselle, which is on page 29. This poem came about as the result of taking a trip into Boston to see the ballet. I have several poems about being on the T in this book, and I've been thinking about that, and I didn't really pay that much attention to it when I was doing the book, but my father worked for the MTA, as it was called back when he worked on it, and he was one of the founders of the union, and I'm very proud of that particular fact. But here, I've just gone to see the ballet, and the ballet's name was Giselle, and here I'm writing After Giselle. In the crowded trolley, I feel someone touching me, a man gesturing to the seat he's vacated, asking, "Would you like to sit down?" His voice is hesitant, and even though I'm stiff from 3 hours folded into a balcony seat at the ballet, I'd rather stand and take pleasure in the swaying of the car and the vision of myself performing an arabesque, my right leg elevated, toe pointed back, while my left leg steadies and supports the line of my body parallel to the floor. For my back is limber, had better be, after all my sun salutations, my vinyasas. And here's this man, the look in his eyes, like I'm his beloved granny. Is he 20, 25? He sees not a prima ballerina, but a woman of a certain age. I'd like to slug him, blacken his clueless eyes. Still, there's his gallantry, rare as Raleigh's cape, here in Boston on the Green Line in the 21st century. So I thank him and sit down. Because there was a moment where I really felt a kind of empathy for this man, because here he's offered me his seat and, you know, it's awkward.
So this is a real incident?
It's a real incident, and I sort of said, well, I can't say, you know, please, I can stand perfectly well by myself. No, I sat down.
Can you remember the first time someone stood for you? Well, of course, that would happen more frequently if you're a woman.
Yes.
Not connected with age.
Yes. And it's very nice to have people with manners these days, because you don't often think of manners in the 21st century, but people do have manners, and they do offer people of a certain age a seat.
I love that
on the trolley.
That expression, of a certain age.
Of a certain age, right. Well, I learned today that I'm the same age as Ali MacGraw, because there was an article about her in the paper.
Really?
So, yes, Ali MacGraw and I, women of a certain age.
Well, you're both doing well. You're both doing well. I want to ask, I always try to get this in before the show's over, about writing habits, work habits. Tell us if you write every day, or write when inspired, or have special rituals connected. How's the process go?
Okay. I'm one of those awful people who writes every day because I keep a journal. And it's just become part of my ritual that every night before I go to bed, I write in my journal. And so this doesn't necessarily turn into a poem, but what it does is it keeps me in touch with what's going on inside. So it's a way of communicating with myself, so that when I sit down to write a poem, there's a certain kind of fluidity in what I write. Another thing that I do is I will use a technique that I learned from one of the women that I worked with at Salem State when she was teaching her writing courses. And it's called a free writing process. So I will sit down and I will have a big pad of yellow paper, and I know that I'm going to write 3 different times. And I'll write from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, and I'll even write down the time. And then I will start the second entry from the point where I finished the first one. And then I'll do the same thing from the third one. By the time I've gotten to that third piece of paper, it's like I'm so far away from where I began, and I'm really writing something that, for me, is deep. It's deeper than the surface. And that's where I want to get to. So then I'll take that home with me and mess around with it, and I just might have a poem.
So you sit down with the pad and treat this as almost some sort of automatic writing? You just write down what's bombarding you?
Yeah, what's on my mind. And I start with something that I'm reading. I've been reading Gwendolyn Brooks and Rita Dove. I'm leading my poetry salon in Marblehead on African American poets this season. So these are the poets that I'm reading. So I will find a really interesting line from a poem, and that's where I'll start my process of writing those three entries.
Aside from that, do you get up in the morning, say at a certain hour, and
No.
write for a certain amount of time every
I
day?
don't.
No?
I'm not good. I'm not good in the morning at writing.
No?
I write at night.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you're an evening person?
I'm more of an evening
You're
person.
not up at 4?
Well, not unless
Not intentionally.
not intentionally. Yeah. So no, I don't write in the morning. Anyway.
Can you
So
pick another poem out
Sure.
after that? The break in technique there.
I would like to read a poem called "You Should Avoid Young Children," which is on page 87. This is towards the end of the book, in the section of the book that I call, if I can remember. These are the more upbeat poems which are at the end of my book. It's called Beyond Ruin. So the title of this poem is negative, but it ends up in a positive place. So, and the title is also important because it leads into the poem. You should avoid young children because they fill their diapers with reliable ease, sitting on your lap or spread out on your best mattress. Guilt is as foreign to them as vichyssoise. Because they spread sticky fingers over the piano keys, looking for you to hoist them onto your lap. They slam the ivories for the racket they can make. Rethink your nap. Because they are blank slates on which so much waits to be written, their eyes open wide to take everything in, including the lines around your eyes, the pouches under your chin. Because they manipulate the controls on the TV, finger the holes in the electric socket, stomp the cat's switching tail, only to smile and gaze at you as if you held the keys to joy. Because you can embrace them, but you can't bind them. Because they have nothing to give you and everything. Because something loosens when they come around. Something opens you didn't know was shut.
So it comes completely around.
Sure.
The series of becauses.
Yeah.
All the reasons are negative initially.
And negative,
there are
absolutely.
these positive. Why did you start with the title that is negative?
I started with that title. This is another secret I'm telling you of my process. I get a newsletter once a month from a poet whose name is Diane Lockwood. And in this newsletter, she has a prompt, or she'll have a poem, and from the poem, she'll give a writer's prompt. So there was a poem on her newsletter that began, "You should avoid vichyssoise." And then the poem was built with because. And then she said, why don't you write a poem with your own title, "You Should Avoid." And so I did. You should avoid young children. Now, this poem is based upon my own grandchildren. So I feel that the details are mine, and the details are specific.
So the prompt worked.
The prompt worked. Not all prompts work.
No, I've had varied luck with fooling around with prompts.
This one I enjoyed. This one was fun to write, and it just sort of happened.
I just got from Julia, our camera woman, the 3-minute sign.
Okay.
So I want to begin to wrap up.
All right.
I'm going to show the book again. This is What Diamonds Can Do by our guest this evening, Claire Keyes, and it's available at the bookstore in Beverly Farms.
Yes.
Also on Amazon.
On Amazon.
And the Salem State Bookstore, I'll bet.
Maybe.
Should be. Should certainly be in the Salem State bookstore. Claire, I want to thank you for coming down
It's
and
been a
being on the
pleasure.
Writer's Block again. I hope the sales of the book skyrocket now because you've been on the Writer's Block. And I've read through this a couple of times because we were at a soiree, a salon not too long ago talking about the book. It's a wonderful book,
Thank you.
and I want to recommend it to our audience.
Thank you very much.
So, besides thanking Claire Keyes for being on the Writer's Block, I want to thank you for being with us and watching the Writer's Block. If you've learned something about poetry from Claire Keyes, about writing on glass with diamonds, then we've done our job. Go out now and etch a little piece of poetry on a pane of glass. That'll be a sign that we've really done our job this week. So thank you again for being with us, and I hope to see you once more next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.